Helen Paul was an ordinary woman living in a small town, her life as simple as her surroundings. She was in her early 30s, with a quiet but warm beauty, a heart that welcomed everyone with kindness, and an old soul that had seen many hardships yet chose to keep love alive. Helen worked at the town library, a job she loved because of her deep connection with books. Stories were her escape, especially tales of love. She believed that true romance was like an endless river, winding through life, steady and unbreakable. One evening, after a long day, Helen was arranging books on the library shelf when a soft, deep voice startled her. "Excuse me, could you help me find something?" Turning around, Helen found herself face to face with a man who looked about her age. His name was Jerry. He had kind, intelligent eyes and a gentle smile that instantly made her feel comfortable. Helen nodded, her cheeks blushing slightly. "Of course. What book are you looking for?" He hesitated for a moment, then chuckled. "Well, I actually don't know. I was just looking for something meaningful, I guess." There was something in his voice, an openness that spoke to Helen. "How about a novel that explores love?" she suggested with a slight smile. "Not the kind of love you see in movies. I mean the kind that touches the soul." Jerry's face lit up. "That sounds perfect." Helen led him to her favorite section, picking out a worn-out copy of Pride and Prejudice. "It's a classic. I think you'll find it meaningful." He took it, fingers brushing over hers for a brief moment, and thanked her with a smile that reached his eyes. For the next few weeks, Jerry came to the library often. Sometimes he would ask for book recommendations, other times he would simply sit at a corner table, reading or jotting down notes. Slowly, a quiet friendship blossomed between him and Helen. They would talk for hours about the stories they read, sharing thoughts, secrets, and dreams. One rainy evening, Jerry closed the book he was reading and looked over at Helen, who was tidying the shelves. "Helen," he called softly, and she turned to him, noticing the thoughtful look on his face. "What's your favorite love story?" Helen hesitated, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. She could feel her cheeks warming. "I've never really thought about it, but maybe I'd say the greatest love story is the one that hasn't ended yet. One that continues through ups and downs, even after life changes." Jerry looked at her intently. "Then do you believe in that kind of love? A love that lasts forever?" Helen nodded slowly. "Yes, I do. It's rare, but I think it exists." Jerry smiled softly. "You know, Helen, sometimes I feel like people come into our lives for a reason." She looked down, feeling a strange flutter in her chest. In that moment, she wondered if she had become part of Jerry's life for a reason too. The two of them continued their conversation as the rain poured outside, unaware of how close they had grown. Over the next few months, Helen and Jerry spent more and more time together, both inside and outside the library. They visited nearby cafes, had long walks in the town park, and even went on small trips to the countryside. Helen found herself feeling things she hadn't felt in years. With Jerry, she felt seen, understood, and cherished. He would often bring her small gifts, like flowers he picked himself or notes filled with kind words. Jerry had a quiet but profound way of showing his love, a way that melted her heart. But one day, Jerry didn't come to the library. Helen waited, checking the door every few minutes, hoping to see his familiar face. Days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of him. Her heart ached with worry and loneliness. She had never felt so close to someone before, and now he had vanished without a word. She tried not to let her mind fill with negative thoughts, but the pain was unbearable. Then, one evening, as Helen was about to close the library, the door opened, and there he was, Jerry. His face looked pale, and there was a sadness in his eyes that she had never seen before. "Helen, I'm so sorry," he said softly, his voice trembling. I didn't want to leave like that." Helen's voice quivered as she replied, "I thought you were gone for good. Why did you leave without saying anything?" Jerry lowered his gaze, gathering his thoughts. "I didn't want to hurt you, Helen. I've been dealing with something for a long time. I have a heart condition. It's getting worse, and I needed to go to the hospital in the city for tests and treatment." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy cloud. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I thought if I told you, you'd feel burdened, or worse, pity me. I didn't want that. I wanted you to see me the way you always have, as just Jerry." Helen's eyes filled with tears, but she reached out, taking his hand. "Jerry, I would never think of you as anything other than who you are to me. You're my friend, my heart." For a moment, they stood in silence, their hands intertwined. Helen knew that his condition meant there would be hard days ahead. But she wasn't afraid. She looked into his eyes and said, "I'm not going anywhere, Jerry. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." From that day on, Their bond only grew stronger. Every moment they spent together became precious, a memory they would treasure. Helen found joy in taking care of him, in sitting by his side when he wasn't feeling well, and in reading aloud to him whenever he felt too weak to hold a book. Jerry, in turn, found a deep sense of peace in her presence, feeling loved in a way he had never known before. One night, as they lay side by side under the stars, Jerry took Helen's hand and whispered, "You've made my life feel endless, Helen. Every day with you feels like a lifetime." Helen smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "And I'll keep making it endless, Jerry. As long as we're together, time doesn't matter." Seasons passed, and though Jerry's health declined, their love only grew stronger. The townspeople began to notice the change in Helen, how her eyes shone with a quiet strength and an enduring love that everyone could feel. She cared for Jerry with a devotion that went beyond words. One winter evening, Helen held Jerry's hand as he lay in bed, his breathing slow and labored. Snow fell softly outside the window, blanketing the town in silence. Jerry looked up at her, his voice barely a whisper. "Helen, thank you. Thank you for making my life a love story." Helen leaned close, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "And our story isn't over, Jerry. It never will be." With a gentle smile, Jerry closed his eyes, his hand still in hers, as he drifted into a peaceful sleep. Days turned into weeks, and though Helen's heart ached, she knew that Jerry was still with her. Their love, like a river, flowed endlessly through her life, guiding her with memories of their time together. In the years that followed, Helen continued working at the library, sharing stories of love and hope with others, often telling them about a man named Jerry, who had taught her the true meaning of an endless romance. The townspeople noticed that she always had a faint smile, as if she carried a piece of her love within her, something eternal and unbreakable. And every night, as she looked up at the stars, Helen would whisper softly, "Our love lives on, Jerry." Forever. In her heart, she knew he could hear her, their love as boundless and endless as the night sky above.